Jessie here. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. Let's talk about books. I've posted videos in the past about books that I've been reading this year. I posted a video about everything I read in January. There were a lot of books there. I started out the year strong, reading a ton. Reading has been a hobby of mine for as long as I can remember, but over the past few years, I hadn't been reading as much as I wanted to, and so I made it a goal of mine to read more in 2024, and I started off the new year with a bang. I read 9 books in January to talk to you about all of the books I read and my ratings for them, and then I was continuing to go strong in February. Fewer books read, but I still posted that video, talked about all of the books I read in February. And now here it is May, and you guys haven't heard from me. And it's not because I haven't been reading, it's just that I haven't been reading as much, haven't been reading enough to continue making like a video every month. Plus there was just other content I wanted to share, but I'm still loving reading and I still want to share the books that I'm reading. So I'm just gonna pop up a video here and there every couple of months or every few months, just depending on the amount that I'm reading, sharing with you the books that I read. So this video is going to be the books that I read in March and April, and thank God for Goodreads and myself updating Goodreads, because otherwise there's no way I'd even remember all the books that I've read. My memory is terrible, but I was updating Goodreads. If you follow me on Goodreads, you can get up-to-date updates. Every time I finish a book, I go in immediately to Goodreads and update it with my rating. So if you don't want to wait for these videos, that's a great place to follow me to, get updates in real time on what I'm reading and how I'm liking them. But we're going to talk about all of the books I read in March and April. It's a total of 6 books that we're going to go over. So I'm averaging about 3 books a month. Not as many as I would like, but way more than I have read in the past couple of years combined. So I feel really good about that. So we're going to start out with the first book that I finished in March. Goodreads tells me I finished this book March 4th. Again, so grateful to myself for updating, because otherwise this video would be all over the place. So the first book that I read in March was Jurassic Park. One of the things that I've been doing in 2024, I set myself a little reading challenge to read as many Stephen King books as I could in 2024. Now, Jurassic Park's not a Stephen King book, but I need to tell you that to tell you kind of why I read Jurassic Park. So in addition to reading the Stephen King books, I also wanted to watch the film adaptations. And I have been doing that and enjoying that. We'll get more into some Stephen King stuff here in a bit, but it also made me want to read some of the books that some of my favorite movies are based on. So like in February, I read I Am Legend because I really, really enjoyed that movie with Will Smith. The book was way better, by the way. Go back and watch my books I read in February for my full in-depth review on that book. And so I also have always wanted to read Jurassic Park, and I was like, what am I waiting for? Let's do it. So I read Jurassic Park, and then I watched the movie, and I really thoroughly enjoyed the Jurassic Park book. I wasn't sure how it was gonna be written or how I was gonna like it. I've been a Jurassic Park stan since I was little. I loved those movies growing up. I still love them now. The originals are my favorite, but I've loved all of the expanded universe of Jurassic Park with the Jurassic World movies. I love dinosaurs, what can I say? But I really enjoyed the book. Now, it's been a couple of months since I read it, so the details are a little murky, but I do remember there being a lot of the science behind making the dinosaurs in the book. And even though it was a lot of DNA sequencing and stuff like that, it was all written in a way that was really easy to understand. I found it incredibly entertaining. I was intrigued by what they put into the movies versus what they left out, and I actually feel like the movie is pretty close to the plot of the book. Obviously not quite as expansive as the book was, and there were some definite changes, but I really enjoyed the book. I'm definitely going to read the sequel at some point. I read this back in March. It's now May. Spoiler alert, I haven't read the sequel yet. I tend to try to put some distance between an original book and then its sequel, so maybe I'll read it sometime in May, but I really enjoyed Jurassic Park. I rated it 4 stars out of 5. And unfortunately, I don't write like in-depth reviews. I just give it a star rating on Goodreads. I might have to start writing written reviews so that I can remember by the time I sit down to film this video what I liked about the book or what I didn't. But I do remember it being really thrilling. Definitely a thriller. Lots of action scenes in it. But it was really well written, and I can see why they decided to make it a movie. Of course, I did watch the movie afterwards, and it's still like one of my all-time favorite movies. Love that, especially the score of that movie. Such a classic. After that, I read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and this is a book that I had seen so many people read. It was part of the Goodreads Choice Awards. I think it won a Goodreads Choice Award for like the best book or something. I don't really follow the awards super closely, but I do watch a lot of booktubers, and a lot of their content is surrounding the book, the Goodreads Choice Awards. So I do remember that this won an award, and some of my favorite YouTubers that I watch that are booktubers enjoyed the book a lot. So I found it available to read for free. I was able to read this on one of the platforms. Either it was Hoopla, which I have linked to my library card so I can read the books for free, or it was on my Kindle Unlimited subscription, which is not free, but it's like girl math free because I pay for it once a month and then I can read as many books as I want. So I found it. I was able to read it. I really enjoyed this book as well. It's about a author who steals her friend's book idea after her friend passes away. They're both authors. Her friend is much more successful than she is. So when her friend dies suddenly while she's there at her house, she steals her unpublished novel and tries to pass it off as her own. And a bunch of shenanigans ensue. It was a really good book. I enjoyed it a lot. It was sort of quirky and funny. Again, I didn't write a review. I am going to start doing that so that I have that for future reference, but it's sort of like dark humor. I really liked the writing style. I know that I read through this book like super, super quick. The date on Goodreads that I posted that I read it was, I finished it March 13th. Unfortunately, I did not put a start date. That's another thing I'm going to start doing for my own reference for this videos, but I know it was like, I read it in like 2 or 3 sessions. I couldn't put it down. I really, really enjoyed it. Another 4-star read for me. The next book that I finished in March was The Stand. And you guys, it took me 2.5 months to read The Stand. If you're not familiar, it is a Stephen King novel. It's one of those. I'm trying to read as many Stephen King books in 2024 as I can in publication order. It's probably the book that I was most excited about because The Stand is a lot of people's favorite Stephen King novel. When you hear people talk about Stephen King, a lot of times that's the one that's mentioned as like his best novel of all time. I hadn't read it. I've always wanted to, but it is a monster of a book. It's like 1,400 pages, very long, in-depth. The edition that I read was the uncut edition, so it had absolutely everything in it, and it wasn't a perfect novel for me, but it was pretty darn close. I loved it. I found some of my new, like, all-time favorite characters reading through that book. Nick Andros and Tom Collins. Top tier characters, development, fantastic writing in that book. If you're not familiar, it is about a pandemic that sweeps the nation and kills all but like 2% of the population. It's a flu virus that was very, very difficult to read, like some of the symptoms and the way that people died. But the way that King wrote about that virus and how it spread was some of the most incredible writing that I have ever read. The imagery really sticks with you. Of course, Stephen King writes horror. So it's about that, but it's more about kind of the people left behind and what they do. There's this big, like, religious thing happening. It's a really hard book to explain. There's a lot to it. It's sort of 2 books in one. The first half is all about this pandemic and watching people die and how it spreads and all of this. And then the second half is this big, essentially, war between good and evil. And it was written immaculately. Really, really great. Some of Stephen King's books tend to be a little overlong, or he, like, drops the ball at the end and the ending kind of stinks. I thought The Stand was good all the way through. There was one part that I didn't really like. Throughout the second half of the book, they're building to this literal battle between good and evil, and the end kind of ends in like a Deus Ex Machina, which I didn't really love. Didn't love that part, but everything else was top-notch. I gave it 4 stars. If it hadn't been for that one little part, it would have been 5 stars easy. In addition to watching the book, I also watched the adaptations that I could get my hands on. So I watched the original series. The Stand was done as like a mini series back in the 90s, I think, with Rob Lowe, who I never would have pictured as Nick Andros, but he did a phenomenal job with that role. It also has Gary Sinise and Molly Ringwald. I really, really liked that miniseries. My son just started cutting the grass outside, and as much as I would love to pause filming and wait for him to finish, it's about to rain, so I need to get this video filmed. I'm gonna just try to edit out some of the background noise. I apologize if it's distracting, but yeah, I really, really liked that miniseries a whole lot. They also, in 2020, released an updated version of the miniseries. Found it interesting that the timeline of that, given that that's when the pandemic started. Apparently it was in filming and production before the pandemic, and just interesting timing. I didn't really like the newer version of the miniseries, and it's interesting to me because I said the same thing when I watched the adaptations for Carrie. I liked the original, like, 1970s version of Carrie a lot, and the 2013 version of Carrie was a flop for me. Same thing with this miniseries. The original was fantastic. I liked it. It stayed super, super true to the books. Even though some of the characters weren't like I pictured in my head, like Gary Sinise, did not picture him for that role at all, but he played it pretty flawlessly. Rob Lowe as Nick Andros, never would have put those two together, but he played it really flawlessly as well. The updated version of the miniseries, they did this thing where they tried to tell the story out of order, and I don't have a problem with storytelling done not in chronological order and playing with time and the order of things. I don't have a problem with that, but in this case it just didn't work. I didn't like it. I didn't like what they did with it. Whoopi Goldberg was cast in the role, and I didn't really jive with that either. It didn't fit for me, but overall, I liked the book a ton. I liked the original adaptation. I think if you are going to read the book, I highly encourage it. And I do encourage the adaptation, but just the original. Skip the newer one. The next book that I started to read and ended up not finishing was Night Shift by Stephen King. It's a bunch of short stories all put together into one book. I read through about half of them and I just wasn't jiving with that book. And when I set this sort of challenge for myself, said I was going to read everything in chronological order or like publication order. Night Shift was next and I just couldn't get through it. I am going to go back to it and try to get through the stories that I didn't finish at some point this year, but I know that there's a lot of adaptations that came from stories in that book. I'm sure there's a lot of great stories there, but just I wasn't feeling it. I think coming right off The Stand, such a super long book, horror-filled book, and then immediately going into Night Shift was just a mistake. I needed to change things up and shift things around a little bit, so I will come back to Night Shift at some point. At this point, I put a pin in it. I DNF'd it. So moving on to the next book that I did actually finish. Interestingly enough, another Stephen King novel, but one that I had read before and really loved and had no trouble reading a second time. It's The Long Walk by Richard Bachman. If you're not familiar, Richard Bachman is a pen name for Stephen King. Same author. The Long Walk is sort of a dystopian type novel. It's about a group of boys who sign up to go for a long walk. You have to walk at 4 miles per hour, and the last one standing wins anything they can imagine, anything that they want. The tricky part is that everyone else dies. If you drop below the 4 miles an hour pace that you're supposed to keep, you get 3 warnings and then you're shot. And it was just a really interesting story. It was fast-paced. I got through it super quickly. I enjoyed it as much the second time around as I did the first. I gave it 5 stars. I really, really liked it. There was some like problematic language, obviously, like teenage boys. The way they talk about like women sometimes was a little iffy. But overall, it was a really good story, pretty short, and really well written. Of course, Stephen King is a genius. So, yeah, I really enjoyed reading that. It's my second time through it. One of my all-time favorite Stephen King novels. So that was that. And I believe that was the last book I read in March. No, actually, I finished that April 2nd, according to Goodreads. So that was my first book I finished in April. Next, after that, I needed a break from all the horror, so I read Finley Donovan Is Killing It by Ellie Casamano. This is another book that so many of my favorite booktubers talked about, loved. It's been on my radar for a while. I wanted something funny, which this book was, something with a little bit of a twist to it. It's a book about a woman who accidentally gets hired as a hitman, essentially, through a misunderstanding. And it's just hilarious from start to finish. I laughed out loud reading this book. I gave it 5 stars. Probably like my favorite book I've read so far this year. I enjoyed it. There are a ton of sequels to this book. I do want to read them at some point. It was just a feel-good book. Which is funny to say about a book about murder. But I did really enjoy it. I liked the writing style a ton. If you are looking for just a laugh out loud book, I highly recommend this one. It was great. And then after that, I didn't have a ton of time to read in April, so I only read one other book in April, and it was Louisiana Lucky by Julie Pinnell. This book I found on Kindle Unlimited. I had no idea what it was about, but the cover looked fun. Again, I wanted something kind of light, super quick to read. This did it for me. It's about 3 sisters who win the lottery and the shenanigans that ensue once they win the lottery. Sort of light. There's some romance. There's some drama. it was just, you know, really like cute, quick read, fun. There's some like witty banter going on in that book. And it's just interesting to watch how these three sisters hit the lottery. They think they are going to have it all, and then everything that kind of goes wrong once they win, they collect their winnings. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I went into it not knowing really anything about the author or about the book. I just chose it based on the title. I do that a lot with Kindle Unlimited because, you know, there's no commitment. I can start the book, and if I hate it, I just put it down and pick a new one. But I really enjoyed that book a lot. And that was the last book that I finished. I am currently working through Stephen King's The Dead Zone. Started that at the end of April or early May, but we will talk about that book in my next update. So those are all the books that I read in February and March. Nope. So those are all the books that I read in March and April. I'm having so much fun getting back into reading again. And sharing what I'm reading with you is super fun. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Be on the lookout for more videos coming soon. Follow me on Goodreads for at the moment updates, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!